So welcome everyone. Um, my name is Berenice Garcia Tejes. We're going to go through some webinar protocol before starting our main session. Vamos a ir a unas reglas del seminario en línea antes de comenzar nuestra sesión. Por favor, pónganse cómodos. So you can see the rules. Please mute if you're not speaking, turn off your camera, wait until you're prompted to participate if you want to speak out, raise your hand if you want to speak. You have any question, please call this number if you have questions accessing Zoom or any other features. And please, we're going to keep the questions at the end. You can submit them in the section of Q&A that is at the bottom of your Zoom. And if you want to listen this webinar in Spanish, you can choose that language on the icon that says interpretation, and you will be able to listen it in English or in Spanish. Now I'm going to say the same instructions in Spanish. Amigos, si están escuchando en español este seminario, por favor, apaguen su micrófono si no están hablando, apaguen su cámara, esperen a que les den la palabra, pongan todas sus preguntas en la sección que dice una Q y una A. Si tienen algún problema con el Zoom, ahí está el teléfono para que llamen para soporte técnico. Y si quieren escuchar este seminario en español completo, elijan el globito, la palabra español o Spanish, y ya estamos listos para comenzar. Adelante. Okay, so this is one of our first series for our equity priority buildings programming that we're going to offer to property owners, building managers, and tenants, community members to learn how they can improve their building, improve their energy efficiency, how they can meet the ordinance, and so on. So thank you for being here with us. And I just want to do a recap of our agenda. I'm going to give a brief overview of the program. Then we're going to talk to our amazing speakers. I'm so excited to have them here today. Then we're going to have a section of Q&A, and I'm going to let you know the next steps. What is the equity priority buildings framework? So since last year, we have been helping buildings in their journey to meet the energize their ordinance, and we came out with this amazing strategy to support those buildings that house those vulnerable communities, low income to medium income community members, because those groups are facing more barriers to adapt to climate change. So we built a framework to support property owners that are housing or supporting these community members. We also built an equity index to identify where these buildings are located in Denver. Why we did this? Why we're putting the human touch on decarbonization? It's very important because this is helping us to identify which buildings need more support, which buildings need a technical assistance, which buildings we need to enroll in our programming for heat pumps, for solar panels, etc. To engage to the community, to learn from them, to hear what are the concerns, the resources they need to really join the climate action fight with us, and also to avoid unintended consequences. We don't want to put a harm that will oblige the building owner to pass the cost to tenants. That's why we're working together to co-create this strategy, and also to direct our dollars to where the areas that need it the most in Denver. And all of these measures are improving equity, is lowering the utility bills for some of our community members. We're going to have a program to provide cooling to those buildings that they don't have it. We're improving safety because we're not going to have any more gas equipment inside our buildings and homes. We have less exposure to this contamination. And of course, the communities are being heard and seen. I'm going to put very quickly the same information in Spanish. And all of this is helping us to put a human touch in decarbonization. I want to give you a quick metrics for our program. This program, I just want to remind you that only applies to buildings larger than 25,000 square feet, but that doesn't mean that you cannot talk to us. We have also other resources for smaller buildings. Okay, since launching the program in last February, we have identified 474 potential equity priority buildings. From those, 148 have applied to the program and 137 have been accepted. They are already working with our engineers, consultant, help desk. They are working with electrification pilots, some of them, and we're happy that they are using the program that we co-created together. This is a breakdown for what type of, the big breakdown of the equity priority buildings. As we can see, as we expected, most of them fall in the residential sector. Some of them are commercial, care facilities, workshop facilities, institutions, daycare, manufacture industry, and some daycares. And if all of you will receive these slides, and I have here the link. If you haven't applied to this program and you feel that you qualify for these services, please send us your application. We'll be happy to assist you. And now, yes, the most exciting thing and fun, we're going to have these amazing speakers. I have the pleasure to work with them already for more than 1 year now. Max Kaye, he's with Energy Rich Colorado, and he's a champion of helping all multifamily buildings in Denver and beyond Denver in the state of Colorado. He's putting amazing resources with their multifamily affordable housing program with Energy Rich Colorado. We also have Derek Valenti. He's our super amazing compliance administrator. He's working so hard to make sure that all of you have that great and sound target adjustments. You are meeting your AY target energy use intensity goals. He will tell you more about how you can improve your building. And now I'm going to give them the room to Max. Max, feel free to elaborate more on your introduction. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks, Bernice. Morning, everybody, or afternoon for some. I'm Max Kaye with Energy Outreach Colorado. I'm a senior multifamily program manager, and Energy Outreach Colorado is a private nonprofit that is statewide here in Colorado, with an emphasis and portfolio of support services for low income or income qualified Coloradans to support their energy needs. And so you'll see here, we've got a vision that all Coloradans can support their energy needs. My program specifically focuses on the multifamily affordable housing sector and making those buildings more energy efficient to reduce energy costs and increase comfort and safety and health of tenants and occupants. Next slide, please. So I'm going to try and do my best to speak slowly and take some breaths in between, which is not my strong suit since this is being interpreted. So bear with me as I do that. And today's presentation is really focused on the low cost, high savings measures. So these are the energy efficiency measures that have a good return on investment. That some of these you might consider DIY or do-it-yourself measures, but in all of these cases, Energy Outreach Colorado does have support for many of the multifamily property owners and managers that are probably in today's webinars, overlapping with Denver's definition of equity priority buildings. And I want to sort of emphasize that even though I'm going to go through a list of specific measures, sort of building science 101, we're here to help. And so my contact information is on the end of this presentation. And please, if any of these measures or these processes feel like they would be applicable to your buildings, go ahead and reach out. And we might have some resources through Excel Energy's income qualified energy efficiency programs or our partnership with Denver's Office of Nonprofit Engagement to help pay for a substantial portion of some of these measures in many cases. So that will increase the ROI. And just realizing I never set a timer here, so I don't want to ramble too long. will increase the ROI and make a lot of these measures far more attractive and attainable for many building owners and operators. Next slide, please. So first step, sort of in order of operation, is an energy audit or an energy assessment. And in almost all cases of the buildings that are in Denver that are considered multifamily, Xcel Energy has programs to provide free or reduced cost energy audits. In most cases, I think for overlapping this audience, it would actually be someone from my team at Energy Outreach Colorado. But if there's a property that does, a multifamily property that does not qualify for Energy Outreach Colorado, where we can refer you to the correct implementers with Xcel Energy to provide the free energy assessment so that you can get the same level of guidance and feedback on your properties. And the energy assessment itself is really having an energy professional or a building professional kind of help walk through all areas of your building, the systems of your building, and kind of give a full review of how the systems are operating when we're talking about multifamily building stock in Denver. We're really dealing with a wide range of construction types. We've got 1890s brick buildings. We've got, in terms of multifamily, that could be a duplex or a quad, which is essentially a single family home with some shared walls, all the way up to Francis Heights, which is a 300 unit tower with central systems. So we've got, this is really going to be sort of a broad overview of these types of measures and processes. But an energy audit can sort of help with any building type on how to tier and get the most value out of energy efficiency upgrades for your building. Next slide, please. First, one of the most common measures that we think about when we talk about energy efficiency in buildings and that we pursue is lighting. So LED lights have been sort of around at a somewhat accessible price point now for 10 years plus. And one of the easiest things and the quickest things that we can do in order to reduce energy costs is look for LED opportunities to replace inefficient lighting with LEDs. When we're talking about different types of LED lighting and different types of retrofits, we've got two kind of categories. Relamping, which is just which bulbs have a screw-in base or a pin type base where you can go to your Ace Hardware or Home Depot, buy an LED bulb and pump it in. This is going to be the easiest sort of low-hanging fruit for building owners and managers to get efficient lighting into their units specifically. One thing that I will sort of point out on shopping for LED lights is pay attention to the lifespan. Every LED bulb that you look at a store is going to say how many hours of lifetime that it's rated for. And so when you see that sale and you're like, oh, let me buy, a case of these cheap LED bulbs, sometimes those bulbs are rated at 10,000 hours, and there might be a bulb right next to it on the shelf that's rated for 25,000 hours that is not 2.5 the times of the price. So just pay attention to that, because not all LED bulbs are created equally. And then from there, when we're talking about retrofits, we're talking about getting into the guts, taking apart that lighting fixture, getting into the guts of it and replacing that with an LED technology. In terms of sort of triage and targeting, we want to kind of look at two things. One is the technology and the runtime. So here's a couple examples of technologies that we're still seeing quite a bit in the field that are quite inefficient. And when we're looking at an LED replacement for exterior lighting that's called HID or high intensity discharge, an LED replacement can get a 75% reduction of wattage, which is going to be basically 75% cheaper to operate that single fixture. Same thing for fluorescent tubes. I've got a photo on the next slide. And then we also want to be cognizant of what the runtime of that equipment. So if it's 24 hours, that's where we're going to see the most savings. Then we're talking about exterior, which is usually running at 12 hours a day on average from sundown to sunup. And then in unit, which is quite variable. So here I've got a couple examples of projected savings for some of these types and examples of fixture replacements. And so again, when we're talking about multifamily housing in Denver, it's a very wide range, but if you've got a hallway with 10 fixtures that are 2 lamp, 4-foot fluorescents that run at 24 hours a day, you could see savings of up to $360 per year just for those 10 fixtures. And so from there, you can sort of scale up or scale down. We see these fixtures often in hallways, in laundry rooms, often above kitchens and bathrooms as well. Next slide, please. Sorry for the graph or the chart here, but the next sort of easiest type of technology to replace is just the fixture type for your hot water. So your kitchen sink, your bathroom sink, both dispense hot water, and your shower head. Depending on the age of those fixtures, if they were installed within the last 5 years, it's likely based on new regulations that they are a low flow fixture. But you can check usually right on the shower head in very small print, or right on the aerator, which is just the screw-in piece at the bottom of the faucet. It will say the gallons per minute or liter per minute flow for that fixture. If you can't read it, it's a good indication that it's likely an older flow rate and it could be upgraded to a low flow hot water saving fixture. Again, these are small in cost. They're usually a couple dollars in cost. The savings amount that you see here modeled on the far right column is small, but as you scale that and you think about it, a 10-unit building, we're quickly getting into the hundreds of dollars of potential savings. And so again, when we're talking about multifamily, sometimes depending on the utility metering structure for those buildings, that savings is realized by the tenant. Sometimes it's realized by the property owner. Sometimes it's split between electric and gas or various configurations. So this is sort of a broad overview of what kind of savings you might see, but every little piece helps. And I think that is sort of the emphasis of today's talk. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about buildings more from the construction standpoint, not just a swap out. So air sealing and insulation are sort of the next 3 to 4 slides here. And again, when we're talking about multifamily building types, a lot of multifamily building types in Denver do not have accessible crawl spaces or basements. They are slab on grade construction, and there's just nothing beneath the floor. Same thing for attics. Some of our townhomes and duplexes and quads have accessible attics, but a lot of our buildings have flat roofs, which you can sometimes upgrade the insulation, but I wouldn't put that in the low cost category. So really, when we're thinking about retrofit air sealing and insulation, it's do we have an accessible crawl space, an accessible basement, or an accessible attic? The next few slides reflect those types of building configurations. So when we think about air sealing and insulation, the idea is really just to limit communication between that space that is you're paying to be heating and cooled and the space that is not. One of the main things I want to emphasize here is this prolonged expected life of heating equipment. Oftentimes when we're out in the field looking at multifamily buildings, we might go into a building which is poorly insulated. The furnace might be operating 45 minutes of every hour in order to maintain the desired temperature of the tenant to keep them comfortable. After insulation, that might get reduced to half an hour out of every hour. And so that's where you're seeing the energy savings on your bills, but you also think that you're reducing the runtime of that equipment by 33%, and that could just prolong the lifetime of that equipment by 33%. So thinking about protecting the equipment that we already have in our buildings And, we all know HVAC systems are incredibly expensive to replace, relative to the other technologies that we see in our building types. Next slide, please. Insulation comes after air sealing in terms of sequencing. In part, that's just a practical reason. It is hard to access all of the penetrations and areas of draft once you've fully insulated an attic. One thing that you'll see here, some Department of Energy statistics for estimated savings in Denver's climate zone for an average insulation job for buildings that do not have cooling and buildings that do have cooling. Next slide, please. One of the surprises that we are often, hearing from property owners after we do an insulation job or we evaluate their existing insulation is they'll say, yeah, we've got plenty of insulation in our attic, and we go up and it'll be maybe 6 to 8 inches of insulation, which at the time that that building was constructed might have been seen as sufficient. And we've learned a lot about the value of insulation and building sciences since the 1980s and prior. And now the Department of Energy for Denver's climate zone is recommending an insulation level of what they call an R value, R49, between R49 and R60. So depending on the type of insulation, if it's a blown-in sort of insulation, often we're looking at between 12 and 24 inches of insulation, which is quite a lot for those, compared to how we used to build buildings, and can sometimes surprise people in terms of what is the recommended amount of insulation for Denver's climate zone in 2023. Next slide, please. Pipe insulation is sort of the last measure that I have on my list today to chat about. Pipe insulation is often overlooked in terms of an energy saving measure, in part because depending on the location of your pipes, if they're sort of outside of the conditioned space or envelope, they might have pipe insulation on them because of a freeze risk in Denver's climate. If they're inside the conditioned space or envelope, a lot of times we don't think about pipe insulation as an area of heat loss because it's being recaptured by the building. If this example of a boiler room in this photo is directly under your bedroom is going to be pretty hot without turning up your thermostat. And so you might be thinking, oh, this is actually a great way for me to get sort of free heating in a way. But where it's having the biggest negative drawbacks are sort of the farthest point uses from this primary system. So think about where's the shower that's the farthest away from this boiler. And by the time that it gets there, if those pipes aren't insulated, you're experiencing so much heat loss over so many linear feet that your boiler plant or your hot water heater is having to work much, much harder to deliver 100-degree water to the farthest shower head in that building, or if it's a hydronic baseboard, 140-degree water to the farthest baseboard in that building. And so DOE estimates 3 to 4% savings annually, whether that's electric water heating or gas water heating. And again, this can help reduce the stress on your HVAC equipment and prolong the lifetime of that equipment. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about maintenance. Not upgrading your equipment. How do we take care of the existing equipment in a way that reduces bills and prolongs that equipment? And the strongest recommendation I have is to read the manual. We don't always have the manual for older HVAC equipment. So I would encourage kind of like looking at the nameplate of your equipment and trying to see if you can find a manual on the internet. Manufacturers' recommendations are going to be the best source of information for maintaining your equipment. There are some sort of best practices in terms of changing filters regularly every 3 months or so, doing a clean and tune, or at least a clean and an inspection annually of any type of HVAC equipment. And we're talking water heaters, boilers, evaporative coolers, rooftop units, air conditionings, All of these have the ability, especially in Denver, when we have air quality events, to get dirty quickly. It depends on where this equipment is located. If you have a furnace that is located in a crawl space, I would assume that those filters are getting dirty in an interval far less than 3 months, maybe every 1 to 2 months, you're replacing those filters. Filters are cheap and they can really prolong the lifespan of your equipment. And then when we're talking about larger buildings, so think more commercial scale, boilers, RTUs, retro commissioning is something to look into. This is not something that Energy Outreach Colorado can really help out with or support, but we can kind of refer to various partners and contractors depending on the system type. But the idea of retro commissioning is really, how do we look at the system as it was designed when it was installed and built, and what has happened in the last 10 years since then? How do we sort of get it back to its point of design? So a lot of times we'll have maintenance folks, we'll have property management go in and sort of fine tuning or adjusting set points for different conditions or different complaints in the building. Sometimes we'll have tenants let themselves into the HVAC equipment and start making adjustments based on their preferences. And all those little adjustments over time can really diminish the performance and efficiency of your HVAC equipment. And so a retro commissioning audit is essentially a full assessment by a third party that will assess how your HVAC equipment, and again, we're talking about bigger equipment here. I'm thinking 20 units plus, rooftop units, central boilers, more complicated systems perhaps. They'll assess what the current state is, how it was designed, bring it back to hopefully its original design state based on manufacturer's recommendations. And this is very variable in savings because it really depends on what the maintenance history of that equipment was. We show an average of 5 to 10% of savings here, but for some buildings, we've seen a much higher savings associated with retro commissioning, even where we've caught buildings that are simultaneously cooling and heating at the same time because the controls have no longer been communicating with each other. Next slide. So that's it in terms of the sort of overview building science 101 and measures that we're going to consider low cost, high savings measures. I want to talk a little bit about the support that Energy Outreach Colorado can offer. And I believe that Berenice is going to kind of also circle back to this at the end of the presentation today. Our programs are designed to serve families that are at 80% of area median income or below. I'm pointing this out because Denver has done a really good job of creating a broad, equitable definition of their equity priority buildings. All of the buildings that qualify for Energy Outreach Colorado's support and services will qualify for Denver's definition of equity priority buildings. But unfortunately, based on the rules of our funders, not all equity priority buildings qualify for these income levels. So if you believe or think that your building qualifies at these income levels, we can help provide the free energy assessment through Excel Energy and reduce cost energy efficiency upgrades, sometimes all the way up to no cost. It really just depends on the building type and the building systems, and that's through partnership with Excel Energy and the City of Denver's Office of Nonprofit Engagement. And if you don't know if you qualify for these, just please reach out to us. We'll connect you with the right resource. There are other programs through Excel Energy and through the city that can help absorb some of the costs for these various services and equipment replacements.
Thank you.
Berenice is going to be sending out the slide deck, so don't feel the need to necessarily write down the contact information, but yes, looking forward to hearing from anybody who's interested in learning more.
Thank you, Max. This was great. Thank you for sharing all your expertise and your knowledgeable experience and work on this topic. If you guys have any questions, again, I remind you to put them on the Q&A section. We're going to take questions at the end. And now let's move on with our amazing colleague, Derek Valenti.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernice, and thank you, Maxwell. One of the things before I get completely started, I would like to say that if you qualify for Energy Outreach Colorado, it is a great resource. A lot of the information I will be going over actually will be a little bit repeat on some of the stuff that Maxwell presented on too, but this is more for those who are able to do their work themselves and want to go their own path. So I am Derek Valenti. I'm the compliance administrator for the Energized Denver Ordinance. Next slide. So first section I want to touch on is maintenance. And so proper maintenance of your HVAC equipment, as well as refrigeration, is essential to ensuring your equipment is operating efficiently and will ensure your equipment will last as long as possible. We did have someone in the comment section bring up coils and well as refrigeration equipment. It is anything, not just HVAC, but anything that has a motor and should have some type of maintenance schedule to it. So we'll go to the next slide. And a couple best practices for maintenance. I encourage you to create a document to track your operations and maintenance schedule. So this means changing filters, tuning up equipment, looking at things. And with any HVAC equipment, I recommend you tune it up before your peak summer and peak winter temperatures hit. That way you're going to ensure that everything is operating as efficiently as possible during those times, which will help save you energy as well as help your equipment last longer. If you have some commercial space that maybe you're not using, I recommend you turn off the equipment when it's not in use. You can do that by going to the thermostat. You don't necessarily have to go to that piece of equipment specifically. And then the other major point within maintenance is ensuring you keep exterior doors closed when your HVAC is running. If you have a store that you're encouraging people to come in and out of, keeping the door closed can help save you some money and energy. Next slide is thermostats. So buildings waste significant amounts of energy maintaining comfortable temperatures during times that spaces are unoccupied, such as at night, on weekends, or on holidays. Programmable thermostats allow building managers to save a significant amount of energy by automatically adjusting temperature set points or settings according to the time of day. Next slide. And so a couple of key points and things to think about. You can get up to 10% annual savings on heating and cooling by adjusting your thermostat 7 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 hours a day from its normal setting. And so if you're in an office building or a store and you're about to close your doors for the evening and there's not an unoccupied space, adjust your thermostat before you leave at the end of the day. That's 7 to 10 degrees. And then when you come in the morning, you can then turn it back on or readjust it back to the original setting, maybe an hour before the full daily function happens. That way, you ensure your space is properly heated or cooled for the right time of day. The other opportunity is investing in a smart thermostat, which will automatically program temperatures. One of the abilities with a smart thermostat is you can set hours of the day in which the thermostat will adjust its temperature. And one of the other really cool features is also called geofencing, which is basically an app on your phone that will talk to your thermostat and automatically adjust the temperature in your home when you leave, when you get outside of the specific grid of that geofencing of your home. And then when you start to drive back home and get within that circle, it'll actually trigger your thermostat to then go back to the same cooling or heating temperature that you had originally set it at. One of the things and one of the resources we'll constantly talk about, and we have a section for it at the end, is utilizing existing incentives. We'll touch on resources a little bit more later. Next slide. So windows. This is always a very tough one, not always a low cost opportunity for people. But if your windows are 25 to 30 years plus old, you should consider replacing them. But we know that this can be a very expensive route. So if we'll go to the next slide, some practices you can do with your existing windows is prevent air infiltration. So seal the perimeter of the window. If you go to your local hardware store, it's very cost effective. Typically, you can afford enough sealer for less than $50 for your property, which will apply weather strips to the inside of the window, which will help prevent airflow coming from outside. I actually have a semi-comical story from my own home. I have 30-plus-year-old windows, and on one of the freezing cold days this winter, I grabbed my morning coffee and stood next to the bay window, and I could actually feel a breeze coming through the window because it wasn't properly sealed. And so I went and bought some sealant and properly sealed my window, and you could feel in a matter of a day the difference in temperature and how much easier it was for that specific room to maintain the temperature that I put on the thermostat. The other opportunity, if you have larger windows, is to apply a window glaze. And that's especially focused in areas that receive the most direct sunlight. So window glazing might not be the most cost-effective approach for somebody. So if you do it with a targeted approach, focusing on areas where the heat is most affected and the rooms have the most issues controlling temperature, it's a more cost-effective way for you to approach and get those savings. Next slide. So lighting, as Maxwell had certainly outlined, lighting is a great opportunity. Building owners whose properties use incandescent, high-intensity discharge lamps or fluorescent lighting can significantly reduce energy consumption by upgrading to highly energy-efficient LED lighting technology. In addition to reducing wattage, LED lights have a benefit of a longer lifespan and less efficient lighting alternatives. So you'll need to replace them less frequently. Also, as Maxwell had pointed out, when you go and purchase your light bulbs from the store, be sure to look at the lifespan that's projected, because sometimes the most inexpensive lighting fixtures or bulbs may not last the longest. Next slide. And so a couple items with the lighting, you can see up to 7% annual savings with those upgrades. Payback for these are typically less than 5 years, so it's a very sound financial investment. And then a couple things, one of the things you can do that might be a no-cost item is install a photo cell, which that could be a low cost, or if your exterior lighting is on a timer, you can adjust your timer to match the sunset to sunrise every day. And one of the items I like to point out is on the summer solstice, there's 9 hours of night versus on the winter solstice, there's 14.5 hours of night. So just those 2 days alone are a difference of 5.5 hours of sunlight. And so taking advantage of that and altering your schedule can really result in some large savings, especially for your exterior lights. And you can always change these light bulbs yourself. Excel has some great programs currently available to make this all cost effective for you as well. Next slide. Insulation. So insulating a building can cost thousands of dollars. If you have different areas of your building that gets hotter or colder with the outside temperature faster than other areas of your building, then insulation may be your problem. Next slide. So here's a couple strategies to approaching insulation if you can't afford it all in one big, all at one time. So with attic insulation, you can take a room by room approach when adding insulation. You can focus on those rooms where temperatures fluctuate the most, and it's hardest to maintain the temperature you like during the peak hours of the day. Also look for any signs of air infiltration and seal them. One of the tricks that you can do is a matchstick test. So if you take a match and you light it and you blow it out, you can put the smoke that's coming off that match next to your windows or any gaps in your wall, and you'll be able to see if any air is coming in or out. And then the next item is using pipe insulation to wrap your hot water pipes. Typically those paybacks are under 2 years. I know we had a question on that too, which we'll address in the Q&A section as well. And next slide, please. Next section is renewable subscriptions. So out-of-pocket solar install can be very expensive and typically has a fairly long ROI. That's a return on investment. So instead of purchasing solar all on your own, there are some rebates and incentives that already exist to make this a more cost-effective approach for you. Next slide. Another option with renewables is a renewable subscription service. And so Xcel offers a per performance solar install program where they can come out and actually help install solar for you. If installing solar is not possible, you can explore certain community solar opportunities, which can receive up to a 10% discount on your bill if you're enrolled. And so we'll share these slides and you can see these links, which will take you to those direct programs after this presentation's over. Next slide. So water upgrades, this may not result in direct EUI performance for the Energize Denver ordinance, but it is a great way and a low-cost way to help save money and lower your water bills. So while building owners should prioritize energy savings to comply with the requirements for the Denver Building Performance Policy, investing in water efficiency can save energy used to heat water, and the water bill savings can subsidize more costly energy efficient upgrades. As Maxwell had referenced earlier, one of the things you can do if you look at that top right picture, they're circled in those pictures are where you might be able to find the flow rates of your specific equipment. And so that's one way. If you are unable to read what it says, it probably means you have a pretty old aerator, which could use an upgrade to something a little bit more efficient. Next slide. So water upgrades, if your water bills are higher than you expect, you should go and find those flow rates as we had showed. Certain bathrooms, if you're in a restaurant, you could do as low as 0.5 gallons per minute on your aerator, and shower heads can go as low as 1.5 gallons, maybe even 1.25 gallons per minute with your shower heads. This can result in both water and heating savings because it's going to require less energy needed to create as much hot water. These items typically have a return on investment of less than 3 years. And if you're in the multifamily setting, you typically see a much faster payback than that. Next slide. So a couple do-it-yourself resources. And we went through a bunch of different options you can do yourself at the house. But if you're planning on doing any type of upgrade to a building, I highly recommend you look at what resources are out there because there are incentives and rebates associated for pretty much any work that would result in some form of energy efficiency saving with your building. So here are a couple of the places you can find some resources and rebates. We have the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. So the EPA offers a really cool resource called the Energy Treasure Hunt. which provides a step-by-step opportunity to identify quick fixes that offer quick paybacks. You can assemble a team with this to work together to gain a better understanding of your facility. So if you have any facilities managers, they recommend you work together. And it provides a specific checklist based on your building type to identify specific energy efficiency opportunities. So if you're a restaurant, it might include some refrigeration, or if you're a commercial business, it might be more focused on HVAC equipment and windows and lighting. Next slide. Another EPA resource is their 10 recommended low cost, no cost guideline. It's just a simple one-page document that'll help outline some of these issues that we've actually gone over today. It offers opportunities to maximize daylight activity. So it might be, maybe you don't need to turn specific lights on during the day because it's closer to a window and you can do some daylight harvesting. Provides maintenance tasks to anyone so that anyone can do. And you can print it out and use it as a reference every quarter to go and look at all your necessary equipment. Next slide. State resource. So we have the Commercial Property Clean Energy Finance, or CPACE is what we call it, which offers financing up to 100% of a project cost. And then it offers other programs, including weatherization. So if you're looking to do some major capital improvements and you don't think you have any funding opportunities, CPACE might be a great opportunity for you in order to have a $0 down investment, but get a lot of efficiency opportunities within your building. Those loans and that financing can go up to a couple $1 million worth of opportunities based on the energy savings that it can obtain. Next slide. Next, so Energize Denver. So as Bernice had pointed out earlier, we have assistance for our equity priority buildings. This is, I believe, the second time we've included this link, and we'll share it again with everybody to have later. We offer potential help with benchmarking, with other potential opportunities with a virtual site assessment, on-site assessment, and if the building qualifies enough, there may be some financial assistance opportunities for energy efficiency upgrades. Next slide. The last slide of resources we have is Xcel Energy resources. The first one is going back to Maxwell. If you're a multifamily, utilizing that avenue is a great resource, but also Xcel has some business savings programs which explore multiple rebates and incentives that are designed to fit your specific needs. They'll come in and audit your building. They plan projects around the best rebates available and explore other efficiency options you may not have known about, such as rate programs or Empower Intelligent. These are different Xcel specific programs that don't necessarily involve your building directly, but can work with you and you can take advantage of those opportunities. There's a link to that free building assessment in this as well. And next slide is you have my contact information there. So please feel free to email me with any questions you may have. But we'll take this time to open up the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Derek. And Sharon, can you please help me to see if there are any questions that we want to address?
Yes. One question that came in, and Max did a really good job of answering a bunch of the questions already, but I may ask him the same question out loud so that we can go through language interpretation. So let me, the one that we have up that we haven't answered yet is, how do you suggest going about energy efficiency upgrades for garden level or basement units? Would wall insulation be your best option to see the most improvement or payback?
I can talk to this one first, and then Maxwell, if you want to add on to it too. Insulation may not be the best opportunity for basement units, but it's still available. I would recommend exploring any other lighting upgrades or any HVAC opportunities that you might have available as well.
Yeah, garden level and basement units are just very tricky, especially in terms of not just low cost, but also like a non-destructive method, right? So if you're doing a full rehab, absolutely be focusing on basement and garden level units. But if it's occupied units, that gets kind of tricky. So I'd say at the very least, it's good to assess the wall insulation in basement and garden level units so that you can strategize for, you know, if you're, this wouldn't apply if you're a tenant, but if you're a building owner or manager, so that you can strategize for when you do turn those units, or there is, you know, a unit that has a soiled carpet that needs to be replaced and those units are unoccupied, could we add wall insulation at that time? And Sharon, feel free to rehash any of the ones. I'm happy to sort of go over them again or extrapolate. I was just trying to keep up with the chat as best as I could.
Yep. The question about, are your audits ASHRAE level 2 per Energize Denver? Our multifamily building was quoted $16,000 to do a level 2 audit. How can we reduce that cost?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll kick it to Derek and Berenice. Are the audits sponsored by Excel, whether that's through Energy Outreach Colorado or another implementer, are ASHRAE level 1 audits. And I put in my answer that I think Equity Priority Buildings team has some technical assistance resources that might include ASHRAE level 2 audits, but I'll let the program experts talk about that.
Sure. Thanks. So we do offer our equity priority building assistance, but that's going to be based on specific criteria. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every equity priority building will qualify for an ASHRAE level 2. So what we would do from the CASR side and Energize Denver side is we would start with looking at your benchmarking, looking at some of the simple upfront building performance things that we might be able to capitalize on to see if we can get the building into compliance before doing an ASHRAE level 2 audit. But then if we get to that point and it fits specific criteria, we can maybe be able to offer some assistance within that, wherever that building would fall.
I might
Yes.
also add to that. Hi everybody, I'm Sharon. I work with Berenice and Derek on the Energize Denver team. The Excel building energy assessment process is ASHRAE level 1, but they are also, depending on like the needs of the building and what's going on, sometimes do a more advanced energy assessment that may not be through Max's program in Energy Outreach Colorado, but they do have like an advanced level of assessments. They just do the ASHRAE level 1 first. And we are working with Excel Energy to look at the results of what those advanced audits might look like to decide whether or not we would consider that okay for, let's say, a timeline adjustment application where an ASHRAE level 2 is needed. So anybody that goes through the Equity Priority Building program has flexibility to work with our office and on the requirements. So if you are not in the program yet and think you might qualify, I encourage you to apply, because it may give us a little bit more flexibility to work with your building. If you don't qualify as an equity priority building, you still have an option of at least starting with Excel Energy's building energy assessment. And if they bump it up to more advanced audit, we are working with them to decide whether or not that qualifies. Okay, next one. In larger commercial spaces that may not have an attic or crawl space, where is best to target pipe insulation?
So I did put an answer in the chat, but to your point of making sure we're including interpretation, boiler rooms and hot water heating rooms are the first place to start. There will be some exposed pipe in there. It's just a matter of how much. And then the other sort of sneaky place that I included in my answer, underneath drop ceilings. So the foam panels and the grid that are on the ceilings that once you open up are always really difficult to get right back in place. It can be an incredibly tedious process. So labor, depending on if it's hired out or if it's DIY, could be expensive. But the cost for installation remains the same at by linear foot. And this can be we've seen this particular impacts on comfort around insulating those spaces. Because if you think of a long hallway where there's a hot water pipe going all year long in that hallway, you might not know why it's so hot all the time and your AC cannot keep up. Any other ideas, Derek?
Thinking if your hot water piping is on the side of a building, you could do would not say it's very cost effective. It would be a pretty costly measure, but you could do some foam insulation of the side of the building itself, which will kind of in turn insulate that piping. But you wouldn't have it would be wouldn't necessarily just be pipe insulation focused on its own.
Next question is, are there operations and maintenance schedule templates on your website you can share?
I'll talk to this one. Actually, I could probably just read your answer as well, Maxwell, so we don't have to talk over each other. So Energy Outreach Colorado does not have an O&M schedule template. And CASR, we also do not have one available right now. But it is a great point. We do follow ASHRAE standard 100 and 180 in terms of operations and maintenance schedules. So you can use that as a resource when wanting to create it. But you are not the first person to ask this question. So I do think it'll be something we will look into as an office at some point.
Max, as a follow-up question to that, you talked a lot about looking at the manuals that came with the equipment, or maybe you can look them up online if you don't have them or something like that. Do they have things like recommended maintenance schedules in those manuals?
They do. What they don't often have is like a template that you can like run through a photocopier, put up in your HVAC room and sort of like use it as a log or the organization and a reminder of when that service was completed. But almost every operated manual for HVAC operation is going to have manufacturers intervals for servicing, and sometimes it's a broad range of servicing. Not totally unlike a car where some things need to be done at 60,000 miles, but other things need to be done at 120,000 miles. And so there's the annual servicing, there's the regular preventative maintenance around cleaning, around filter replacement. But then there's also sometimes some larger items that need to be done less frequently that are slipped through the cracks as well. And I'll also want to emphasize too, rooftop units are where we see the most neglected filters often, because it's direct outside air, and sometimes property staff and maintenance managers don't know that those units actually have filters that need to be cleaned. People are pretty good about furnace filters. I would say they don't clean them as frequently as the furnaces sort of require, but at least there's usually some sort of schedule at most of the buildings that we work with. Same with air source heat pumps, mini splits. Those are the types where you kind of just pull them out and can rinse them underneath the sink or vacuum them. But those need to be at least inspected very regularly. But it's the rooftop units and evaporative coolers. Some evaporative coolers have filters, some are just washing the pads. These get gunked up really quickly, especially in the late fall and early spring when you've got basically if you're getting allergies, think about cleaning or addressing your outdoor air filters.
Good point. I like to I set a calendar reminder on my own personal phone to change my filters. So I would recommend doing that as well for anybody who tends to forget to change filters.
Max, you talked about the question about heat pumps and adjusting thermostats when we were talking about doing it for unoccupied times and that kind of thing. Could you kind of review? I think we're all getting used to heat pumps as a new technology and how to maintain and run them. Could you talk about the answer that you put in the Q&A?
Yeah, one of the participants sort of called out that the setback recommendations on a thermostat might not be applicable to air source heat pumps. And I'll sort of caveat that with there are a lot of different types of heat pump systems. And so when we're talking about maybe a newer air source heat pump, that might be something that's less than 5 years old, or certainly a mini split heat pump. If it is a full building or full unit solution, so let's not the example where you've got a primary HVAC system, but then one mini split head that's helping supplement cooling. But where it's a full unit solution or a full building solution, again, referring to the manufacturer's specifications and their recommendations, a lot of those heat pump manufacturers will suggest just getting to your desired set point and letting the heat pump do the work. So the heat pump is generally very efficient. Not all the heat pumps are created equally in terms of efficiency, but the way that they work is, and one of the adjustments that we're seeing when we're implementing them in the field is compared to your boiler, compared to your furnace, that ramp up period takes a lot longer. In part of why they're efficient, but it is, it can be unnerving when you're used to getting your heat up to a certain level within a certain amount of time. And then what you see in turn is folks going to their thermostat and going, okay, I'm going to do it higher because I'm not getting the heat in the amount of time that I need, which is actually creating a less efficient operation. So because they take longer to ramp up, that's one of the reasons why manufacturers recommend just getting to your desired set point, whether that's 65 or 68 degrees, and leaving it there for the most efficient operation.
Thanks. So I have one question that we might just be able to speculate on, but does Excel have the capacity to meet the demand as states try to meet their climate goals?
I think speculatively, in their current state, no. But I think that we're all anticipating a rate of adoption and ramp up as part of this energy transition and fuel source transition. And Excel is very aware of what they need to do in order to keep up with the infrastructure side to accommodate that transition and not, put us in a state where we have rolling blackouts, which I don't think would be the case. But just
Max, I might also add to that, because when I said meet the demand, I don't know whether or not that's the capacity on the electrical grid or capacity of incentive and rebate programs. I took it one way and you answered it a different way. So I might add to that. So overall, the capacity of the grid, if you look at it at a very high level, is okay. It's individual microgrids that are maybe maxed out, like downtown Denver, or very specific areas that are very specifically maxed out where the demand issue is. But we have several folks within our office that are working with Excel all the time, and the Public Utilities Commission, to try and build out exactly what needs to happen on the infrastructure side. On the incentive and rebate side, we have been told by Excel, especially like in their strategic energy management program or their building energy assessment program, they are very undersubscribed. They are actually not giving out as many incentives and assessments and rebates as they want to, and they need us to help drive more people to their programs. I know sometimes their website gets in the way of that because it's very, very confusing, but what I'd encourage everybody to do is actually, you can, for the equity priority buildings, you can work with us. We have direct contacts with very specific people in the programs. But if you are not in the EPB program, I would suggest calling their business solutions center, because the folks that are at their help desk will kind of ask you a whole bunch of questions and then figure out which programs work, because they have more than like 20 different programs and rebates and incentives. And Colorado Energy Outreach Colorado is just one of them, and they run several different programs for Excel, but there's so many different programs, it's hard to figure out which ones you qualify for. And so calling in to their help desk is honestly one of the best ways to get help on figuring that out. So we don't have any other questions in the Q&A.
Sharon, just to add on to that point too, in our PowerPoint, we have that business savings link. That would be a good link to use as well. And then the other thing I always like to say to encourage people to make sure they utilize those incentives is anybody who's paying Excel's utility bills are also paying for these incentive programs. And so, this is something that Excel wants you to take advantage of, and it's kind of a first come, first serve basis. Granted, we don't know, we expect them to be around for a very long time. And so it's just, a great way to recoup some of the money you've been paying on your Excel bills as is.
Good point, Derek. Thank you very much. And now I'm just going to share with you all next steps. Thank you again, Max and Derek, for sharing your expertise and best practices in how to do energy efficiency upgrades that don't cost too much, right? So please, as Derek, Sharon, and Max mentioned to you, call, email the help desk. If you don't qualify as an equity priority building, we can provide you a standard support. Sign up for these assessments that Sharon and Derek and Max mentioned. One of my colleagues made a great job to divide these assessments per building type. So I'm going to include the link here for you when you receive the slides. Apply for the Energy Rich Colorados. They have programs for nonprofits and for multifamily, affordable housing. Apply to our classification. If you don't, if it's confusing, you don't know about it, please let me know and I can walk you through the process. And stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We hear you, and I know that some of you want to create educational materials for your tenants to cooperate with you to reduce this energy consumption. So we're going to talk about the time of the use rate that you can share with your tenants. It will be on September 28. We're going to send you a follow-up for you to register. We're also having a webinar on access to capital. Like, okay, I know I have to do these upgrades, I have to replace my windows, but from where I get the money, right? So we're going to have experts from banks, from CPAs, from other institutions that can tell you how to apply to their processes. And that's all. I don't know if there are more questions. If not, you have 20 minutes more of your time to enjoy. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a los que nos escucharon en español. Vamos a estar con más noticias en los próximos meses. Max, Derek, Sharon, anything else that you want to add?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.